Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We will start now. Just a few introductions before we begin to the speakers today and to Zuban. Zuban is a feminist publishing house and NGO which chronicles and participates in women's movements in India. Um, I'm Ishani and I work at Zuban. So, this is the fourth in our series of conversations on the issues posed by COVID-19, the pandemic, and the lockdown in India. It features feminist activists, researchers, and writers. Today, we're addressing the experiences of queer and trans communities, and we will be speaking with Raj, Revati, and Chainika Shah. We frame this set of conversations as one about a crisis of care, rooted in feminist principles of collectiveness, compassion, and care that should be driving responses, ours as well as the states, to the public health emergency and the parallel humanitarian crisis that it has led to. So let me tell you a little bit about the speakers we have today, and I'm going to tell you in order of how they speak today. Raj is our first speaker. They wear more than one hat, literally and metaphorically. Time is divided between working with animals or on mental health. Raj is a trustee of Parcham, a collective that uses football to engage with adolescent girls. Next, we'll have Revati, who is a writer and activist working with sexual minorities for women's rights and HIV awareness. Until 2010, she worked with Sangama and is now involved in theatre work that has been performed both nationally and internationally. She has written 3 books: Feelings of the Entire Body, The Truth About Me, and A Life in Trans Activism. And her name is featured on the walls of the Butler Library at Columbia University. So, Manga is a theatre person, a translator, and an academician, and will be translating for Revati. Chainika Shah is our third speaker, who is a queer feminist activist, researcher, and teacher who has been part of the autonomous feminist movements and queer organizing for several years as a member of 2 collectives, Forum Against Oppression of Women and Labia, a queer feminist LBT collective. She has, she has co-authored No Outlaws in the Gender Galaxy, a Zuban publication with Raj, Smriti Navatia, and Charles Mahajan. So each speaker is going to speak for about 10 minutes. Revati's portion will be a little bit longer as we'll be having translation. I just want to go over the rules for us today for the participants as just in ahead. I've already mentioned this, but you'll be auto muted on entry and you'll find that your videos are disabled. Please keep them disabled. The chat box will be open for questions throughout, but we will close it once we get a certain number of questions that can be answered today. After that, the raise hand function will still be available for you to direct requests at the host. You will find my name as well as a bunch of other people who have Zuban in their name, and you can direct your requests to them or to whoever is currently giving updates in the chat box. We will start dealing with the audience questions from around 12:40 because that's how long the speakers are going to be presenting to begin with. The discussion is going to be recorded and posted online. The list of participants will not be available, but if you choose to ask a question via the chat box, your name might be available. Entry is being moderated against trolling, and we will be very strict in terms of any racist, transphobic, queerphobic, or any other hate speech. Anybody indulging in the same will be removed immediately without warning from the webinar. We've also had questions from many people about concerns on Zoom. Now, this is not being hosted locally on Zoom servers, which was the problem that the Indian government had pointed out. This is being recorded only on our computers. So no one needs to worry about that. In terms of routing, it is being routed as a paid account through the India server. And if you have an account that is registered in India, your data will be going through the Indian servers. That addresses what was happening. In terms of posting anything that any of our speakers are saying, you are free to do so for Chainika and Raj's presentations. But for Revati, we would ask you to check once before posting. And I think, unless I've forgotten something, we are ready to begin. So Raj, let me hand over to you.
Okay, thanks Ishani, and thanks for having me here. I'm going to talk today from the locus of my mental health work, which actually focuses on making mental health accessible to marginalized communities. So these are really extraordinary times. They're unprecedented, unusual, and there's a huge sense of uncertainty, loss of control, a lack of preparation. So from a mental health perspective, there are some predominant emotions and feelings that most of us are experiencing. Worry, tension, stress, feeling anxiety, sadness, or even numbness. Now, these are very understandable and absolutely valid responses to this circumstance. Because after all, as Ishani, you mentioned earlier, and I'm sure everyone else in the series has mentioned, COVID is not just a pandemic with a public health dimension, but it is deeply an issue of human rights, livelihoods, access to care, and social justice. But in terms of how this looks for queer and trans communities, on uncertainty, it's something that everyone is going through. Uh, but for queer and trans communities, uncertainty, especially looked at through the lens of settling down, queer calendars look different. Our milestones look different. Um, do we look to the future in the same way that people who live in heteronormative structural systems look at? So I think to borrow from disability rights, uh, and I think this holds for queer trans communities as well. Disability rights has a concept that they called trip time, which is a flexible attitude towards timekeeping that comes from uncertainty. Maybe things will happen, maybe they won't. Uh, but for queer trans communities, we already live in a world where we are measuring time in much shorter increments, where we are looking at future very differently, where we are looking at planning future very differently, and possibly access to hope may or may not look the same for us. So that's the first point. Even though everyone is experiencing uncertainty, I think for queer trans communities, we already live with uncertainty, so we experience it slightly different than does everyone else. Okay. Now on crisis of care. The crisis of care has only been heightened by COVID for queer trans communities because family, state, and larger society abdicate their care and responsibility for those who do not follow rules around gender and sexuality. Families are often made out to be sites of support, but we know that this support is conditional. Family have norms about gender and sexuality that are rigidly enforced and expected to be followed. And unfortunately, support is conditional. It comes only when we conform. So what happens to those for whom these norms don't apply? All of a sudden, families viciously withhold love and care. They disown queer trans persons, and family spaces become violent spaces. Suddenly, queer trans persons find themselves out of the family system. So, in light of COVID, what this means is historically family systems have failed queer people. Um, Queer persons and trans persons cannot be stably located within family systems. And thus, when gender or sexuality norms keep us out of the family, who can we turn to? Should be the state, but the state also lets us down. And this is in many ways. I'll go over those ways in a bit. But I do want to talk, before I get into more details, that during COVID, there has been a focus on migrant communities. And I just want to put forth that individuals who are marginalized by sexuality and gender, as well as by caste, by intercaste marriage, by interreligious marriage, are also forced to migrate to preserve themselves and live a more authentic and true life. But all of this comes at a cost of losing existing support systems, of losing social networks from hometowns. And this should be kept in mind when we talk about migration, COVID, and care. So if I have to move on now to specifically psychosocial distress around COVID and care and queer trans communities, during the lockdown, the everydayness of the violence, lack of escape outlets, and access of care, which is outside natal family homes, has meant that violence at the hands of homo-negative and trans-negative people has significantly increased. We are using the words homo-negative and trans-negative specifically because transphobia or homophobia from a mental health locus would seem like we have no control over the phobia, when in fact we know that individuals do have very much control about how they marginalize and discriminate against queer trans people. Hence the usage of the term homo-negative and trans-negative. So, okay, to get back. So for some, the lockdown makes it harder because there's no access to queer spaces currently. They may be living in a household with no reflection of self. For many hijra and trans communities, livelihoods are gravely impacted, especially for sex work and begging. And that relates back very directly to mental health, because mental health is what we call psychosocial, which means that structural oppression systems around us directly contribute to our mental health. Trans persons are unable to access self-care due to lack of access to hormones. Life-saving gender affirmation surgeries have been put on hold. For those who live with HIV, ART drugs are inaccessible either due to costs or unavailability. And in this sense, we can see how the state itself is abdicating responsibility, as many trans and non-binary persons are left out of distribution of ration, and whatever minimal social safety nets are being provided are not being given simply because many people are unable to comply with a provision such as ID cards. So in terms of mental health, what are the sort of distresses this leads to? First and foremost, for queer trans communities, self-care or even the idea of care is for us to be able to access living an authentic life, which is true to oneself. And that is being threatened currently due to lack of access to livelihoods, care, medication, and justice. Along with that, if I look at state systems and public health systems, there is invisibility, there is erasure. If one is in a situation where one is not around queer community, there is self-censoring, there is hypervigilance. There was this, I think, a case of posters being put up in Hyderabad Metro about trans persons being carriers for COVID. There is scrutiny and surveillance if one is in a home environment or with natal family. There is no outlet for thoughts and feelings because we cannot access community. If one is living in a household, in a heteronormative household, there's no representation. And in this, particularly during this time, community support plays a vital role, and we cannot underestimate its importance. So even as I talk from the locus of mental health, I'm going to say that care is best provided by community, and community has been doing it for decades, of feminist and queer activism, of trans activism. So we need not only look at mental health experts. What we can do is we can borrow from the mental health field to make community systems of care more sustainable with further skills and techniques. And I think my time is ending now. So I'm going to say that in light of COVID, and if we all are not counted, if persons who are marginalized by gender, sexuality, caste, and religion are not counted in this current scenario, we will not be able to re-examine how systemic failures of the healthcare system, of state systems, and of familial systems have left so many citizens, persons vulnerable, and we will not be able to put in place measures that may forestall a resurgence of COVID or forestall other disasters or emergencies. I think my time is up, right? Okay, so done. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. We'll have questions afterwards. I want to hand over now to Revati, who will be speaking and being translated by Mangai. So anybody who speaks Tamil, of course, will not need that, but let's start.
அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். கேக்குதுங்களா?
நல்லா கேக்குது.
ஓகே. அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். இணையம் வழியாக ஜுவான் தோழிகள் என்னை அழைத்தமைக்கு மிக்க மகிழ்ச்சி. என்னுடைய உரையை மொழிமாற்றம் செய்ய வந்த மங்கை அவர்களுக்கும் என்னுடைய நன்றிகள். இந்த COVID-19 கொரோனா வைரஸ் நம்ம உலக நாடுகளே அச்சுறுத்திக்கிட்டு இருக்கு. ஆயிரக்கணக்கான லட்சக்கணக்கான பேர் நம்ம இறந்துகிட்டு இருக்கோம். இது ரொம்ப வருத்தமான செய்தி. மூச்சு காத்து மூலமா கூட இந்த தொற்று பரவுதுன்னு சொல்றது எல்லாருமே ரொம்ப கலங்கி போயிருக்கோம். எல்லாருக்குமே இன்னைக்கு ஒரு டிப்ரெஷன்ல தான் எல்லாரும் நம்ம இருக்கிறோம். நம்ம இந்த சூழல்ல ஒரு ஒடுக்கப்பட்ட சமுதாயத்திலிருந்து வந்த நான் ஒரு திருநங்கையா நான் என்ன சொல்றேன்னா, வைரஸ் அப்படின்னு சொன்ன உடனே எனக்கு பழைய ஞாபகம் வருது. எனக்கு அதுதான் HIV AIDS. அதை பத்தியும் உங்களோட நான் ஷேர் பண்ணணும்னு நான் நினைக்கிறேன். நான் இந்த HIV AIDS அப்படிங்கிறது 1981 சவுத் ஆப்பிரிக்காவில முதலா கண்டறியப்பட்டுச்சு. இந்தியாவில 1986 கண்டறியப்பட்டுச்சு. இந்த வைரஸ் புதுசுல எல்லாரும் ரொம்ப பயந்தாங்க. ஆஸ்பத்திரியில யாருமே அவங்கள அட்மிட் பண்ண மாட்டேன்னு சொன்னாங்க. இது ஃபீமேல் செக்ஸ் ஒர்க்கர் கிட்ட இருந்தும் இப்ப எங்களை யாரும் திருநங்கை அரவாணின்னு சொல்றாங்களோ அப்ப எல்லாரும் அலின்னு சொல்லுவாங்க. அலினா ஒட்டுமொத்த கம்யூனிட்டி எல்லாத்தையுமே அழியும்பாங்க. LGBT கம்யூனிட்டி என்ன இருக்கோ அது நம்ம சொல்லுவோம். கே லெஸ்பியன் அப்படின்ற பேரெல்லாம் அப்பெல்லாம் இல்லைங்க நம்ம இந்தியாவில. ஆண் ஓரின சேர்க்கையாளர்னு சொல்லுவாங்க. அப்படி ஆண் ஓரின சேர்க்கையாளர்னு யார் இருக்காங்களோ அவங்க மத்த எல்லாத்தையுமே அலின்னு தான் சொல்லுவாங்க. அப்படி இருக்கும்போது அலிகளிலிருந்தும் ஃபீமேல் செக்ஸ் ஒர்க்கர்ல இருந்து தான் இந்த வியாதி பரவுது அப்படின்னு சொல்லி எல்லாருமே குற்றம் சாட்டினாங்க, பழி போட்டாங்க கம்யூனிட்டி மேல. சோ அப்ப 1999 சகோதரன் அப்படின்ற ஒரு அறக்கட்டளை இருக்கு சென்னையில. அதுல சுனில் மேனன் ஒருத்தர் இருக்கிறாரு. அவரு இந்த ஃபீல்டுல ஒரு ஆய்வு எடுத்தாரு. அந்த ஆய்வுல ஹை ரிஸ்க் கம்யூனிட்டின்னு சொல்லிட்டு எங்களுடைய சமுதாயத்தையும் ஆண் ஓரின சேர்க்கையாளர் சமுதாயத்தையும் அவர் குறிப்பா அந்த ஆய்வுல வந்துச்சு அவங்களுக்கு. ஏன்னா இவங்கெல்லாம் இந்த ஃபீல்டுல இந்த HIV தொற்று பாதிக்கக்கூடிய ஹை ரிஸ்க்ல இருக்கிறாங்கன்ட்டு. அப்படி இருக்கும் போதுதான் WHO இவங்களும் சேர்ந்து இந்த விழிப்புணர்வு பிரச்சாரத்தை ஏற்படுத்தினாங்க. யாருமே கம்யூனிட்டிக்கு அப்படி தொற்று இருந்தாலும் அவங்களால வெளியில சொல்ல முடியல. காரணம் என்னன்னா, ஆல்ரெடி டிரான்ஸ்ஜெண்டர் அப்படின்னு சொன்னாலே ஒரு ஸ்டிக்மா, அதுக்கு மேல எனக்கு HIV இருக்குது அப்படின்னு சொன்னாக்க டபுள் ஸ்டிக்மா. அதுவும் ஹாஸ்பிட்டல்ல யாரும் சேர்த்துக்கிறது இல்ல. ஹாஸ்பிட்டல்ல அவங்கள அன்பா அரவணைக்கிறது இல்ல. இந்த சமூகம் அவங்களை ஏத்துக்கிறது இல்ல, குடும்பம் அவங்களை ஏத்துக்கிறது இல்ல. அப்படின்னு இருக்கும் போது அவங்களுக்கு ரொம்ப பாதிக்கப்படுறதே மன உளைச்சல் தான். இதனால அதிகமான பேர் தற்கொலை முடிவுக்கு போயிட்டாங்க. நிறைய பேர் தற்கொலையும் பண்ணிக்கிட்டாங்க. இங்க இருக்கிற டாக்டரா இருக்கட்டும், HIV பத்தி வேலை செய்யற டாக்டரா இருக்கட்டும், கவுன்சிலரா இருக்கட்டும், அவங்களுக்கும் ஒரு விழிப்புணர்வு கிடையாது. ஏன்னா நாங்க யாரு, எங்களுடைய வாழ்வாதாரம் என்ன, எங்களுடைய வாழ்க்கை பயணம் என்ன, இது எதுவுமே அவங்களுக்கு தெரியாது. அதனால அவங்க கவுன்சிலிங்கே நம்மளுக்கு எந்த வகையிலையும் நம்மளுக்கு பொருத்தமாவும் இல்ல. அதுக்கப்புறம் தான் சகோதரன் மூலியமா தமிழ்நாட்டிலையும் மத்த மாநிலங்கள்ல மத்த ஆர்கனைசேஷனும் தொண்டு நிறுவனங்களும் ஸ்டார்ட் பண்ணி கம்யூனிட்டி ஸ்டாஃப் வேலைக்கு எடுத்து கம்யூனிட்டி மூலியமாவே இந்த அவேர்னஸ் எல்லாருக்கும் கொடுத்தாங்க. இதுல நிறைய பேரு ஆச்சரியப்படுற விஷயம் என்னன்னா, MSW படிக்கல, வேற அவங்க டிகிரி வாங்கல, ஆனா கூட நல்ல கவுன்சிலர் ஆயிட்டு இருக்கிறாங்க. நம்ம கம்யூனிட்டிக்குள்ளாரையே நிறைய பேர் இன்னமும் நல்ல கவுன்சிலர் ஆயிட்டு இருக்கிறாங்க. இன்னைக்கு இந்த HIV/AIDS 80% இன்னைக்கு நம்ம தடை கட்டி இருக்கிறோம் அப்படின்னாக்க இதுல பெரும் பங்கு LGBT கம்யூனிட்டிக்கு உண்டு அப்படின்றத நான் பெருமையா சொல்லிக்குவேன். அம்மா டிரான்ஸ்லேஷன்.
ரேவதி, expressed her dismay at the way this coronavirus is spreading all over the world, and how depressive is it to see so many deaths all around us every day, day in and day out. But for her, this really takes her back to the times of HIV/AIDS and how we really handled that situation at that time. It was discovered in South Africa in 81, and in India, the first HIV patient was discovered in 86. Initially, it was total untouchability. Nobody would really like to accommodate you, talk to you. They refused entry into the hospitals, and especially sex workers. And Ali, as the rest of the community, was clubbed together at that time. So there were no terms to really describe one's own self. Everybody was an Ali. A very rough translation could be eunuch. I don't know whether there must be other regional language versions of the word Ali. It's like calling number 9. And they were all dubbed as high risk category. Sunil Menon in Tamil Nadu actually said how trans women and MSMs were the major high risk category. And then it is the community which made the effort, and through WHO and various other organizations tried to really speak of the awareness, because for the community members, they were already stigmatized both within the family and in the society in general, especially by the medical community. And for them to be trans people and also have HIV was a double stigma. And many people got into suicidal thoughts. Many people actually committed suicide. And even the professionally trained medical people or counselors couldn't help the community at that time, because they were hardly aware of what the community's lives are. How do they really lead their lives? So in Chennai, we have Sahodharan, and there are various other community-based organizations all over the country, where the community members who probably did not have an MSW degree trained themselves as counselors. So if today we are really talking about the tackling of HIV HIV disease, I think the major part of the work was done by the queer community. Revati, சொல்லுங்க.
வந்துட்டு ஒரு பெண் இயக்குனர் இருந்தாங்க. அவங்க எங்களுடைய கம்யூனிட்டி மேல ரொம்ப ஃபேவரா இருந்தாங்க, ரொம்ப அன்பா இருந்தாங்க, ரொம்ப ஆதரவாவும் இருந்தாங்க. அவங்களுடைய முயற்சி என்னன்னா, என்ஜிஓங்க மூலியமா இந்த நிதியை வந்துட்டு சிபிஓங்களுக்கு தான் கொடுக்கணும், சிபிஓங்க வந்து ரன் பண்ணணும், சிபிஓ வந்து பண்ணணும்னு சொன்னாங்க. அது மிகப்பெரிய அச்சீவ்மெண்ட் ஆச்சு எங்களுக்கு. அதனால சிபிஓ மூலியமா நாங்க வந்துட்டு நிறைய அட்வொகேசி ப்ரோக்ராம் பண்ணணும், போலீஸ்க்கு டிஓடி ப்ரோக்ராம் பண்ணணும், லாயருங்களுக்கு சப்போர்ட் பண்ணணும், எங்களை பத்தி நாங்க தெரிவிச்சோம், டாக்டருங்களுக்கு தெரிவிச்சோம், நாங்களாவே வந்து கவுன்சிலர் ஆனோம். இதனால நிறைய மாற்றங்கள் எங்களுக்கு வந்து கிடைச்சிச்சு. அதுக்கப்புறம் அவங்க இயக்குனரா இருந்தவங்க விட்டுட்டு போனதுக்கு அப்புறம் இப்ப சிபிஓ இருக்கு, ஆனா நிதி எதுவும் எங்களுக்கு வர்றதில்ல. என்ஜிஓங்களுக்கு தான் இப்ப நிதி கிடைக்குது, அவங்க தான் ரன் பண்ணிக்கிட்டு இருக்காங்க. அது ஒரு வருத்தமான செய்தி. அம்மா டிரான்ஸ்லேஷன்.
There were also individuals who really made this a possibility, because there were policy makers who were leaders who really made sure that the funds funds were received by the community-based organizations, CBO at that time. But of course, once she left the organization, the funds also lost, but then the community was already trained and was willing to go ahead with whatever work they had begun.
இதுல ஒரு வருத்தமான செய்தி என்ன அப்படின்னாக்கா, இந்த டிரான்ஸ் கம்யூனிட்டியில வந்துட்டு யாரையுமே எஃப்டிஎம் வந்து எடுக்கல, யாருமே லெஸ்பியன் எடுக்கல. எல்லாமே என்ன கேன்னு சொல்றோமோ, நாங்க எம்எஸ்எம்னு என்ன சொல்றோமோ, ஆனா பிறந்து பெண்ணா யாரு மாதிரி இருந்தாங்களோ அவங்கள மட்டும்தான் அந்த டார்கெட் இன்டர்வென்ஷன்ல எடுத்தாங்க. அவங்க எல்லாம் இம்ப்ரூவ் ஆனாங்க. ஆனா இன்னமும் யாரு லெஸ்பியன் நம்ம சொல்லிக்கிறோமோ, பெண் ஒரே சேர்த்தாளருக்கு நம்ம என்ன சொல்றோமோ, அதே மாதிரி பெண்ணா பிறந்து ஆனா மாறினவங்களுடைய நிலைமை இன்னும் ரொம்ப எங்களை விட இன்னும் கொஞ்சம் கஷ்டமா தான் அவங்க வந்து வாழ்ந்துட்டு இருக்காங்க.
So one of the facts that was excluded in this was, when they talked about trans community, they invariably meant trans women community. Lesbians or trans men did not figure in this debate at all. So most of the activities that were directed towards HIV related issues benefited the trans men community and not necessarily the rest.
நம்மளுடைய நால்சா ஜட்ஜ்மெண்ட் வந்ததுக்கு அப்புறம் தான் இப்ப வந்து ஃபீமேல் டு மேல் டிரான்ஸ்ஜெண்டர் பத்தி பேசப்படுறாங்க. எனிவே இப்ப நான் கொரோனா பாதிப்பை பத்தி என்னுடைய சமுதாயம் எந்த அளவுக்கு பாதிச்சிருக்குது அதை பத்தி நான் பேச போறேன். மத்திய அரசு வந்து எங்களுக்கு அறிவிச்சிருந்துச்சு 1500 ரூபாய் இந்தியாவில் இருக்கிற எல்லா திருநங்கைகளுக்கும் வந்து தரணும்னு. அது ரொம்ப வரவேற்கத்தக்கதா இருந்தது, ரொம்ப எங்களுக்கு ஹெல்ப்பா இருந்துச்சு. ஆனா இந்தியாவில் வந்து 2011 வந்து சென்சஸ் பிரகாரம் 4.88 லட்சம் இருக்கிறாங்கன்ட்டு. ஆனா மத்திய அரசாங்கம் ஒதுக்குன அந்த நிதி வந்துட்டு 4500 பேர்த்துக்கு தான் போய் கிடைச்சது. இது 0.1% தான். இது எந்த அளவுக்கு எல்லா கம்யூனிட்டிக்கு போய் சேரல அப்படின்றது மிகப்பெரிய வருத்தம். இது ரெண்டாவது, எல்லாருமே வந்து மெஜாரிட்டிக்கா நாங்க வந்து வாடகை வீட்டுல தான் இருக்கிறோம். முக்கியமா மெஜாரிட்டிக்கா எங்களுடைய தொழில்னு வந்து பார்த்தாக்கா கடை கேட்கறது, பாலியல் தொழில் பண்றது, ரிக்கார்ட் டான்ஸ் ஆடுறவங்க, கரகாட்டம் ஆடுறவங்க, இப்ப ரீசெண்டா கொஞ்சம் பேர் வந்து தியேட்டர்லயும் வந்துட்டு பிளே பண்றாங்க. ஒட்டுமொத்தமா இவங்களுடைய வேலைகள் எல்லாமே வந்து பாதிப்படைஞ்சிருச்சு. இது வெறும் என்னுடைய கம்யூனிட்டிக்கு மாத்திரமல்ல, உலக அளவுல எல்லாருமே வந்து பாதிக்கப்பட்டிருக்காங்க இன்னைக்கு.
Anyway, she's setting aside her ruminations over HIV and moving on to corona. She said the central government had allotted 1,500 rupees as a kind of compensation to the trans people. Now, in 2011, the census accounted for 4.8 lakhs, which in itself may not be all. We don't know how valid that whole calculation is. But then this central government compensation reached 4,500 people, which is almost like 0.1% of the acknowledged trans population by the government itself. And then, of course, the community normally lives in rented houses, so it's going to be a big issue. And in terms of work, many of the community members resort to sex work, begging, dancing, and some of us have started getting into theater, but now all the work has been stalled, not just for the community members, but also for the rest of the world, for everyone.
தமிழ்நாடு அரசாங்கம் எங்களுக்கு ரேஷன் கார்டு இருக்கிறவங்களுக்கு 1000 ரூபாய் கொடுத்துச்சு, ரேஷன் கார்டு இல்லாதவங்களுக்கு ரேஷன் கொடுத்துச்சு. 15 கிலோ அரிசியும் 1 கிலோ பருப்பும் 1 கிலோ ஆயிலும். இது வெறும் திருநங்கை கம்யூனிட்டிக்கு மட்டும் இல்ல, யாருக்கெல்லாம் ரேஷன் கார்டு இல்லையோ நான் கம்யூனிட்டி எல்லாத்துக்குமே அது வழங்கினாங்க. அது எத்தனை நாளைக்கு பத்தும் ஒரு குடும்பத்துக்கு? இன்னைக்கு மெஜாரிட்டிக்கே பார்த்தா எல்லாரும் வாடகை வீட்டுல இருக்கிறாங்க. அதுவும் இல்லாம நம்ம இந்தியாவுல தினமும் நம்ம பார்த்துட்டு இருக்கிறோம், சமூக வலைதளத்துல பாக்குறோம், நியூஸ்ல பாக்குறோம். நம்ம எத்தனையோ கூலி தொழிலாளர்கள் வந்து நடைப்பயணமா 1000கணக்கான மீட்டர் 100கணக்கான மீட்டர் நடந்தே போய்கிட்டு இருக்காங்க அவங்கவுங்க ஊருக்கு. இன்னைக்கு எத்தனையோ வந்து அம்மா உணவகம் இருக்குது, அந்த உணவகத்துல நம்ம பாக்குறோம் எத்தனையோ பேரு கியூல நிக்கிறாங்க சாப்பாட்டுக்காக. எவ்வளவு ஒரு வறுமையான ஒரு சிச்சுவேஷன் இந்த கொரோனா வைரஸ் வந்துட்டு நம்மளுக்கு வந்து கொடுத்திருக்கு. இதோட ரெஸ்பான்சிபிலிட்டி வந்து அரசாங்கம் வந்துட்டு இது எப்படி இது பண்ணணும்னு சொல்லிட்டு சரியான முறையில அவங்க வந்து பிளான் பண்ணணும். இப்போ கூட நிறைய வந்து தன்னார்வலர்களா வந்து நிறைய பேர் வந்து அரிசி பருப்பு எல்லாம் வந்து கொடுத்துக்கிட்டு தான் இருக்கிறாங்க. ரொம்ப முக்கியமான விஷயம் என்னன்னா, நம்ம இந்திய அளவுல டிரான்ஸ்ஜெண்டருக்கு என்னெல்லாம் வந்து கிடைக்குதோ அரிசி பருப்பு, அதுல இருந்து பாதி வந்து ஏழை மக்களுக்கு வந்து கொடுத்துட்டு வர்றாங்க. அது ரொம்ப முக்கியமான பாயிண்ட். அது ரொம்ப சந்தோஷமாவும் இருக்குது. ஏன்னா எனக்கோசரம் நான் ஒரு வருஷத்துக்கு 1 மாசத்துக்கு நான் அரிசி பருப்பை சேர்த்து வைக்கிறது இல்லாம என்ன மாதிரி யாரு பாதிச்சிருக்கிறாங்க அவங்களுக்கு நான் வந்து அதை வந்து பகிர்ந்துக்கணுன்ற அந்த மனப்பக்குவம் இருக்குது பாத்தீங்களா, அதை பார்த்து ரொம்ப நான் வந்து மகிழ்ச்சி அடைகிறேன் நான்.
So Tamil Nadu government actually gave 1,000 rupees per head with ration card, and for those without the ration card, they distributed the other provisions, etc. But how long can people really run on that? And all around you, you find people, especially migrant workers, walking miles and miles, going hungry and tired and dying on the way. And you find people queuing up for food in free outlets like the Amma Unavagam in Tamil Nadu. So it looks like the poverty and hunger is taking a great toll, and the government needs to really plan about it. But one thing that she is really happy about is that the trans people who are getting these rations are not just safeguarding it for themselves. They are willing to go out and share it with the needy people, and that really moves her. That the community is extending its compassion and empathy to the people around. Revati, time mudiyapudhu. Last point mudichukani.
லாஸ்ட் பாயிண்ட். இப்ப உணவு முக்கியமா உயிர் முக்கியமா அப்படின்னு நம்ம வந்து சொன்னோம்னா, எனக்கு உணவு தான் முக்கியம்னு சொல்லுவேன். ஏன்னா உணவு தானே உயிர் வாழ்றதுக்கு நம்மளுக்கு. அதனால நான் அரசாங்கத்துக்கு இந்த மீடியா மூலியமா நான் என்ன கோரிக்கை வைக்கிறேன்னா, மினிமம் பேஸ்ட் எங்களுக்கு ஒரு 3000 ரூபாய்னாவது எங்களுக்கு மந்த்லி எங்களுக்கு தரணும். ஏன்னா இந்த லாக்டவுன் ஓபன் ஆனா கூட நாங்க கடைக்கடையா போக முடியுமா, நாங்க இல்ல போய் நாங்க வந்து பாலியல் தொழில் பண்ண முடியுமான்னு எங்களுக்கு தெரியல. எங்களை மாதிரி நிறைய பேர் வறுமையில் இருக்கிறவங்களுக்கும் அதே நிலைமை தான். மினிமம் பேஸ் 3000 ரூபாய் மந்த்லி எங்களுக்கு நிதி ஒதுக்கணும். ரேஷன் எங்களுக்கு வந்து ஃப்ரீயா கொடுக்கணும். நாங்க எல்லாருமே வாடகை வீட்டுல இருக்கிறோம். அதையும் நீங்க வந்து கருத்துல வச்சுக்கணும்னு கேட்டு என்னுடைய உரையை முடிக்கிறேன். வாய்ப்பு கொடுத்ததுக்கு ரொம்ப நன்றி தெரிவிச்சுக்கிறேன் நான்.
So if we are asked to choose between food and life, Revati says she would choose food because food is what is going to really keep you alive. So the demand that she would like to really make through this portal is that they have to get a 3,000 rupees at minimum, 3,000 rupees monthly for a few months to come, because even if this corona lockdown is over and you can't really bounce back into your usual life afterwards. So 3,000 rupees monthly, ration card, and possibility to stay on in the houses that they have rented out now would be some of the immediate things that one needs to really look into. So she would pass on this demand through this portal and thank Zuban for giving this opportunity to share her views. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Revati ji. And thank you, Mangai, for the translation. I just want to point out one thing before we continue. A lot of you have been asking questions. Thank you for that. I would ask you to please mention who you would like those questions answered by, so that when we're doing the question part of the session, we know who to direct the questions at. And another clarification, which has been made in the chat box as well, is that comments will not be read out. Only questions will be posed to the speakers, but they will be able to see your comments in the chat box, and we will make sure that they get to them. But yeah, in the interest of time, we won't be speaking those out. So I'd like to hand this over to Chainika now.
Yeah, hi, thanks Ishani, and thanks Zuban for setting this up. Not only this one, but the earlier webinars as well. It's always nice to hear sane voices in these times of insanity, and sane and insane is all in quotes. I think that earlier pandemics like this one have pointed out to us time and again the fault lines in society. One has realized earlier also that every pandemic and every crisis of this nature, this one being global, otherwise it's more global, is also a relative concept. Today by global we mean the whole world. Sometimes earlier, a century earlier, maybe global meant the whole country. But such large epidemics and such large crises actually show us the naked fault lines of a society. And I think we've been seeing it. We've been seeing it vis-a-vis the state, we've been seeing it vis-a-vis society, and we've been seeing it in the intimate spaces. So I think that the new dimension that is coming in this time around, and that's thanks to the feminist and queer trans discourse that has existed for so many years, that we have a conversation on the private. Otherwise, we would have only talked about the public. So having said that, I would reiterate some of the things that Raj and Revati said and say it slightly differently, or kind of sum up from what they said, and split my presentation in four kind of points. One is that what are the things vis-a-vis the state, second is vis-a-vis the medical system, third is vis-a-vis the domestic, and fourth is finally the individual and the queer households. As far as the state goes, I mean, this particular state, I wouldn't spend my 10 minutes even beginning to talk about the failures of this state, but to highlight some of the peculiar things for trans and queer communities. As you know, right now, the state is bent upon making the rules for the Trans Act, for the Trans Act. Now, we must recognize that this state, which is supposedly standing up for trans individuals, has already passed an act which has been rejected by the community, that it passed it in such hurry after it got elected last time in May 2019. It has passed the act. The act is here. Now we are in a rush to pass the rules. Nobody understands why. Nobody understands who is pushing this. But 30th of April is the last date to give us recommendations on the rules. And I do not understand what is this concern of the state at this moment instead of listening to the kind of things that Revati has been talking about, instead of listening to the needs of the community, how the state is hell-bent upon pushing its own agenda. The special provision that Revati said, and rightly, that it went only to 4,500 people, it did not come without people demanding it. So those who demanded, those who registered, they got it. And this is another big fault line. Who is it who has access to a phone and internet to be able to register this? Who has access to any cash in their hands to be able to access the internet, even if they had a smartphone in the first place? So we are making a system, we're making it sound as if these systems will work on the internet without realizing the internet is not really available to everybody. And lastly, the kind of concerns that Revati is raising of a whole lot of professions. So how are we moving from this complete lockdown to partial lockdowns to opening out? What is essential service? What is the service that is going to be allowed? What is the service that is going to be curtailed? How this surveillance state and how this authoritarian state is going to come down on many of the professions that the most vulnerable sections of this community are actually engaging in. Maybe sex work, maybe begging, maybe small entrepreneurs having very small businesses. How are they going to survive? Or even if they're slightly well off, then they're in the entertainment industry. They are in spaces that are considered to be non-essential at the moment, and which do not see a lifting of the lockdown for the next 6 months at least. How does one think of a future in that situation? As far as the health system goes, I think, again, I would refer back to both Raj and Revati in terms of what Revati pointed out, that the HIV/AIDS epidemic, what it taught us about, what kind of social stigma this kind of fear of a disease can spread is something that we have to learn. Instead, what we are finding constantly is stigmatization of a nature that is absolutely unnecessary. Stigmatization along existing fault lines of the society, which is continuously happening, while the health system, again, in West Bengal, when people pushed for beds in COVID wards for trans women and trans men, they have created them. But this just shows us that from 2014, the NALSA judgment has come. Today we are in 2020. Not a single public health system or a hospital system has thought that we have created, we've given visibility, we've given name, we've given identity to a whole section of people, but we have no idea how we are trying to integrate them. We have no idea how we are attending to the kinds of needs that this section of people has. Today, when people are dependent on ART drugs, when they're not able to get to the public health system to get that ART, how do they do it? How do they get access to it? What are the peculiar comorbidities of somebody who's living with HIV positive, who is in an HIV positive state? We don't have any information on this. There's complete silence, as on many other things. I'm just highlighting the things that we have not even spoken of otherwise. So these kinds of silences within the health system, these kinds of silences around peculiar life choices. So what happens to a person who has saved for maybe more than a few months or more than a few years and planned for a gender affirming surgery for the month of April? What is happening to that person? Do we have any idea what is happening to that person? What happens to people who are on hormones, who are not accessing the doctors, who do not know how to continue this treatment? I think that there is too much of silence around it, and maybe there is need for more and more conversation from within the community to start talking about how are we going to address the specific needs over and above the needs that come to us as people who are, we have a lot of variation amongst us. So when we say the queer communities, obviously some of us are living in well-protected houses. We're living and able to live in safe spaces. We have access to a lot of, resources of all kinds, but there is a whole population that Revati flagged, which does not have access to any of this. And they are migrant laborers, they are small entrepreneurs, they are people living on begging, they are people living on sex work. Those are completely invisibilized once again, even in a discourse. And like Raj mentioned about migration, that so many of the people, and as I saw people walking back home, there is, along with all the despair that one feels and the anger that one feels at this situation that people have to do this, there is also a sense, a very, very small thought that comes to mind, that there is a sense of going home. When there is no home, then where is it that you go to? When there is no home, then where is it that you go to is a huge question, and which brings me to the third point, which is about the domestic. So I think that the public and the private divide has actually been exposed by feminists and queer and trans activists for a long time. The feminist debate brought the public into the private and took the private into the public in various measures. New dimensions got added to it as queer lives came into picture. Lots of queer people, and I don't say all, but many queer people find that privacy in the public, as many other straight people also do. So denial of that public space to a large section of people, and the constant advocacy of the, the joys of being at home in itself is stressful. It is stressful to keep hearing, enjoy your home. It is stressful for everyone who does not have a home in physical terms, and it's more stressful for someone who does not have a home in physical terms and who does not even have a notion of a home in their emotional lives. So I think that this and is also not able to imagine what Raj flagged as queer time, not able to imagine when in future will I have access to that public space that I access to live my life in the way that I want to, where I could dress up and be who I am, where I could be with people who are like me. They may be strangers, but they were my community. They were the people with whom I could be who I am. When will I get access to those people is a huge question before people. Uh, the last thing I want to say, and I say it from experience in the sense that it is also pushing, it's also pushing many of us into some sort of, heteronormative mold, because we are also living inside homes. So those of us who have access to spaces like this, who have homes, are also being pushed to live with, in this very coupled manner, in a heteronormative kind of manner. We were joking yesterday, we wonder how people are doing their affairs, because I refuse to believe that people do not have other relationships outside of the home. And so how then do they sustain those? How do they sustain them? Yes, the internet is there. Yes, there is space today, but I don't think relationships, and I think that what the queer relationships highlight for us is that it brings to light relationships that exist even in the so-called straight world. Relationships beyond what I acknowledged, relationships beyond what are seen as long-term, happily married ever after, than many other relationships. And what do we do in the absence of those? What do we do in the absence of that feeling of community, in that feeling of, and I borrow a term from Ratnabali, of skin hunger? I do not have the kind of touch that I want. And what do I do? How do I deal with it? These are the kind of mental health stressors that Raj was pointing out to. But I want to end with the point that I've heard public historians speak of other epidemics, and I think what they found positive in these times is the ways in which communities reach out to each other. So I also think that conversations like these help us to start making those connections, to think of newer ways of relating with each other, newer ways of reaching out to each other, and newer ways of being with each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenica. Thank you to everyone once more. We've got quite a few questions in the chat box, and we're actually going to close that now since it's 12:45. Any questions that might not be answered today, we can direct the ones that might be to Raj or Jenica to them, but Revati will not be able to respond afterwards. So we're going to close this now. Let me start off with a couple of questions for you, Raj. We've got many people asking about Crip Time and asking you to expand a little bit on the concept. And then we have a question specifically that says, I'm a queer and trans non-binary person, born female, living with my mother due to lockdown, and I'm debating coming out. Would there be any ideas or perspectives you can give on navigating this? I am torn between whether this is something I want to do for myself or because I lack community and I'm just decreasing in mental health from being suddenly forced to closet. There's a third question that is actually to both Raj and Chainika, and I'm just going to add it here. And Chainika, if you could come back to this, I'll remind you in the next set, which is a request for the elaboration on the migration of queer communities from a social and policy perspective. So Raj, over to you.
Okay, so I'll take the question first on being in a home with a parent and ideas of coming out and whether to do it or not. So as much as I'd like to say that it would be okay to come out, we know from experience that families do let us down. And unless you're certain about the response from your parent, I would take some time to think. Unless you have some safety mechanisms in place, again, I would take some time to think. But also what I want to say is all of us have an internal narrative. No one said that, oh, you are queer or you are non-binary. That comes from an internal narrative. And in these times, it's very important to rely on that, to hold on to it. That's one. The other thing is that if it's possible to access virtual resources via a phone or maybe even chat, there are many queer collectives out there who do have lines who you can engage with. But unless there are safety plans in place, I would be very wary of coming out in a situation where one may be forced to cohabit a space with a parent who may react badly. But hold on to your internal sense of narrative, and if possible, reach out to a queer collective. I think there are listings in many places online, but more importantly, again, I'm going to say that queer and trans community support is what is critical here, rather than say a mental health professional. I think the second question was on state and policy responses around migration. And I mean, I'm going to say that one is, for most people, leave aside queer, trans, migration is not a choice. So similarly for queer and trans persons, that migration was not a choice. They had to migrate in order to live a life that was authentic to their true selves. And in terms of a policy response, as Chainika mentioned, we've had NALSA around. Unless policies foreground the needs of people from the margins in whatever field, we are not going to reach a stage where policies are comprehensive. So it has to be in housing, there has to be strong non-discrimination in housing, in employment, in schools, because it starts at these points. There are so many queer and trans persons who have had to leave school itself. Education has been interrupted due to violence from school, violence from family, and they've had to leave and migrate in order to live an authentic life. So I think policy changes have to be at multiple levels. And in particular, I know we are talking a lot about stigma, but I want to focus on non-discrimination as a policy point, and that has to be across. And I think Chainika will be able to answer this as well later. But now I'll go on to CRIP time. So if I have to talk about CRIP time and disability rights movement, disability, like queer and trans communities, contests and challenges the assumptions of what is natural and what is normal. And in specific, disability refers to the inability to do something considered to be normal or natural as a result of bodily impairment. And so CRIP time essentially says that we live our lives with a flexible approach to normative time frames. Oh, you must wake up early in the morning. Oh, work schedules mean that you must work from 9 to 5. What time do you wake up? What time do you sleep? These have normality markers, and disability time contests that. Disability time also, or CRIP time also contests that time is in fact not linear, it's not progressive. And similarly for queer and trans communities, we don't have the kind of life milestones that cis-het communities do. There is no concept of, yes, education must be finished by this age, this is the time for marriage, this is the time for birthing. Similarly, CRIP time says the same thing. And CRIP time maybe goes further to say for persons with sensory, physical, or psychosocial disability, some persons contend with impairments of old age while still young. Say, for example, mobility issues. Some disabled persons are treated like children no matter their chronological age. And if we look at medical language of illness, and let's contrast that to medical language around queer and trans, both try to impose the linear. So I'll talk again from my locus, which is in mental health. And there's the idea that recovery is linear. I'm ill, I go to a doctor, I get medicine, and at some point I'm going to be fine. I'm going to recover from my mental illness. Now that's actually never going to be true for me, because I live with anxiety. I'm always going to have it. I'm always going to take medication for it. Yes, it's going to help me cope with life, but I'm never going to be cured in a linear way. So I'm going to end because I think I'm talking too much. But CRIP time also contests about the notion of time as productive and capitalist. What did you do all day? Where do you work? What do you do? Whereas for maybe queer and trans communities or disability rights communities, surviving depression and anxiety is productive. Navigating our gender identities is productive. So I'm going to end by saying CRIP time is resistance, resistance of dominant forms of weighing and of being and living, and of naturalness. And I see many consonances with queer and trans communities there.
Thanks, Raj. I'm going to direct a couple of questions at Revati now. We have two that have come in through the chat and a couple that are actually coming in through the Zuban team. The first question is, are there any specific organizations that you would recommend where participants and others can donate? And is there any ways that you would recommend to personally help out to do our bit to support members of the community who are struggling for food and housing? I'll read out the second one. This is from a research student on transgender literature. And they are hoping to find information on your literature work. So I'm just passing that on, Revati, if you'd like to talk about those at all. And we might have one more question coming in shortly.
Okay, Revati, முதல் question வந்து ஏதாவது நிறுவனங்கள் ஸ்பெசிபிக் நிறுவனங்கள் இருக்கா நம்ம உதவிகளை அனுப்புறதுக்கு அப்படின்னு கேட்டிருக்காங்க. குறிப்பா கம்யூனிட்டி மெம்பர்ஸ்க்கு ரெண்ட், சாப்பாடு இந்த விஷயங்களுக்கு உதவுறதுக்கு யார் மூலமா பண்றது அப்படிங்கறத பத்தி உங்களுக்கு ஏதாவது ரெக்கமெண்டேஷன் இருக்கான்னு கேட்டிருக்காங்க. ரெண்டாவது கேள்வி வந்து ஒரு ஆய்வு மாணவர், அவர் வந்து உங்களோட ஒர்க்கு அல்லது கம்யூனிட்டியோட ஒர்க்கை பத்தி தெரிஞ்சுக்கிறதுக்காக எப்படி உங்களை ரீச் அவுட் பண்றது அப்படிங்கிற விஷயங்கள் கேட்டிருக்காங்க.
நிறைய ஆர்கனைசேஷன் இருக்கு. நாமக்கல்லையும் நம்ம ஊர்லயும் ஆர்கனைசேஷன் இருக்கு. எல்லா மாவட்டங்கள்லயும் சிபிஓங்க இருக்கு. ஆனா ஃபண்ட் இல்லாதனால அந்த சிபிஓங்கெல்லாம் வந்துட்டு ஒரு ஆபீஸா வந்து ரூம் ரெண்ட் வந்து கொடுக்க முடியாம ஸ்டாஃப் எல்லாம் வந்துட்டு அவங்க வீட்டுல இருக்கிற மாதிரி தான் இருக்காங்க. ஆனா சென்னையில வந்து ஆர்கனைசேஷன் இருக்கு. இப்போ ஒரு சின்ன வந்து ஃபண்டு ஃப்ரெண்ட்ஸ் கிட்ட வாங்கி அவங்க அது மூலியமா ஹெல்ப் பண்ணி அவங்க ஆபீஸ் வச்சு நடத்துறவங்க இருக்காங்க. கண்டிப்பா அவங்க மூலியமா நம்ம வந்து இந்த நிதியை வந்து வரவேற்று மத்தவங்களுக்கு நம்ம வந்து பயன்படுத்தலாம். அந்த ஆய்வு மாணவருக்கு நான் என்ன சொல்றேன் சொல்றேன்னாக்கா அவர்கிட்ட இப்ப நான் வந்து இந்த இடத்துல அவங்களோட நான் வந்து சொல்ல முடியாது. அவருடைய இமெயில் ஐடி எனக்கு தரட்டும், இல்லைன்னா அவங்களுடைய நம்பர் எனக்கு வந்து தரட்டும், அவரை நான் வந்து கான்டாக்ட் பண்றேன். நானு அவர் என்ன லாங்குவேஜ் பேசுவாருன்னு எனக்கு வந்து தெரியல.
So for the question on organizations, each district usually has a CBO, but now that they don't have funds or anything, most of them function from their own home base or whatever bases that they actually have. So we need to really identify if you're going district wise. Even in Namakkal, she knows of people who are doing that. In Chennai, there are many people. I'm just adding to what Revati said. Many of the Chennai LGBTQ communities are coming together via Sahodara. So if you're in Chennai, I think that is the base. And they're also reaching out to other people in Tamil Nadu. For the question on, for her research, she said if the person can actually exchange the number or mail ID with her, and she will be able to get in touch. And she's also curious to know what language is the person working on. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get that information and we'll pass it on. We will set this up. We have another couple of questions for Revati. I'll just put them across. One is, how have learnings from how trans communities mobilized and took care of each other during the HIV pandemic formed reactions to the COVID-19 pandemic? And the other question is, when systems fail, we often see that communities step in. Do you have any examples of that?
Okay. Revati, இது வந்து இப்போ ஹெச்ஐவி டைம்ல வந்து எப்படி கம்யூனிட்டி தன்னைத்தானே ஆர்கனைஸ் பண்ணிட்டு மொபிலைஸ் பண்ணி ஒரு ஸ்ட்ராங் ஃபோர்ஸா தன்னை அசர்ட் பண்ணுச்சோ, அதுல இருந்து இந்த COVID-19க்கு நம்ம கத்துக்க வேண்டிய பாடங்கள் ஏதாவது இருக்குன்னு நீங்க நினைக்கிறீங்களா அப்படின்னு கேட்கிறாங்க. அடுத்த கேள்வியும் ஓரளவு தொடர்புடையதுதான். நம்மளை சுத்தி இருக்கக்கூடிய அமைப்புகள், அது வந்து அரசு, அதிகாரம் எல்லாமா இருக்கலாம். அந்த அமைப்புகள் எல்லாம் தோல்வி அடையும் பொழுது கண்டிப்பா கம்யூனிட்டி தான் கூட நிக்குது. அப்ப அத பற்றிய உங்களோட கருத்துக்களை பத்தியும் சொல்றேன்.
டெஃபினெட்லி நான் வந்து இந்த ஹெச்ஐவி பத்தி நான் வந்து பேச ஆரம்பிச்சது இதோட லிங்க் பண்றதுக்கு தான். டெஃபினட்டா எங்களுக்கு அந்த அனுபவம் இருக்குது. ஒரு கம்யூனிட்டிக்குள்ள நாங்க எப்படி இது வந்துட்டு ஒரு நெட்வொர்க்கிங்கா நாங்க இருந்து எங்களை நாங்க எப்படி ப்ரொடெக்ட் பண்ணிக்க முடியும் அப்படின்றத இந்த கொரோனா வைரஸ் எங்களுக்கு வந்து நிறைய அந்த ஹெச்ஐவி மூலியமா அப்ப எங்களுக்கு ஆன அந்த தொந்தரவுல இருந்து நாங்க வந்து பாடம் கத்துருக்கிறோம். அதே மாதிரிதான் இருக்கிறோம். ஆனா இது எவ்வளவு தூரத்துக்கு போகுது, ஏன்னா இதுல மூச்சு காத்து வந்தா கூட இந்த வியாதி நம்மளுக்கு வரும்னு வந்து சொல்லும் போது ஒரு வீட்டுல நாங்க எல்லாருமே வந்து 30 பேரு 25 பேரு 8 பேரு 9 பேர் இந்த மாதிரிதான் நாங்க வந்து வாசிக்கிறோம். எங்களுக்கு ஏன்னா சின்ன ஒரு ரூம்ல தான் எல்லாம் அடைஞ்சுதான் கிடக்கணும். அந்த மாதிரி நிறைய ஏழைகள் அப்படித்தான் இருக்கிறாங்க. அப்ப இந்த கொரோனா வைரஸ்ன்றது எந்த மாதிரி ஒரு நம்மளுக்கு ஹை ரிஸ்கா வரும் அப்படிங்கும் போது நாங்க வீட்டை விட்டு எங்கேயுமே வெளியில போகாம ஒருத்தருக்கு ஒருத்தர் நாங்க வந்து பாதுகாப்பா முகக்கவசம் போட்டுக்கிட்டு கொடுக்கறத வாங்கி சாப்பிட்டுக்கிட்டு தான் இன்னைக்கு வந்து நாங்க வந்து பொழைச்சிக்கிட்டு இருக்கோம் நாங்க. சோ இது ஒரு எங்களுக்கு ஒரு லர்னு தான். இந்த மாதிரி ஒரு லாக்டவுன் வந்ததுக்கு அப்புறம் இது பேர் இழப்பு தான் எங்களுக்கு. ஆனா இருந்தாலும் எங்களுக்கு நாங்க எப்படி வந்து பாதுகாப்பா இருக்கணும், எப்படி உணவை நாங்க வந்து ஷேர் பண்ணிக்கணும் அப்படின்றது எங்களுக்கு definitely.
She said she actually began talking about the HIV and the way the community really worked on mobilizing itself precisely because of that, because there were a lot of lessons that were to be learnt by that. But right now, this is a little more scarier because it is really spreading through, just by being around people, by droplets, by air, so, and many people, especially the community members, live in large numbers in one crowded place, like 8 or 9 crowded in one room, or, sometimes it's 25 to 30 in a slightly bigger space. So now we really don't know how to do. And because you can't really go out and continue the work, then you are just left at the mercy of whatever is coming your way. And you have to really be satisfied with sharing it and also taking into account what's happening in the society. So this is posing a much more greater problem, but I think she says that the community has, since it has really gone through so much during the HIV time, it is actually kind of humbling you to understand the situation today.
Thank you both so much. We have a couple of questions for Chainika now. And after that, we will have a few, I think there are 3 or 4 that are open to anyone. So I'll read those out after Chainika responds, and everyone can respond wherever they'd like. I also want to announce that this is scheduled to go until about 1:15 so that we can accommodate the questions that we've got so far. So Chainika, we've got a couple of questions for you. One is, how can and may non-heteronormative individuals seek out help in situations where they are trapped in a panopticonic state surveillance structure and haven't necessarily come out as queer? That is, do not possess documentation or have proof of their queerness. The second question for you is, can you throw some light on the intimate partner violence in queer relationships and how to deal with it during this time? There was also a question that I posed earlier to Raj, which was about policy perspectives, which you could also answer. And there's, a fourth one, which is talking about the debate around universal income, which has come up lately, especially with the context of migrant workers. What kinds of measures such as these could be introduced for the queer community? So I'll let you take as many of those as you like, and then we'll go to the questions that are open to everyone.
So actually, to answer the first one, I totally understand that the state as it exists today is extremely authoritarian and surveillant, and in that state it is extremely difficult to put yourself out in any manner. Reaching out to communities is fine to say it, but when communities are so intangible, when they are so scattered, when they're not in your geographical space and you're confined to a geographical space, it is extremely difficult. But having said that, I'll borrow from Raj again to say that the sense of self that one has, and one knows that who I am, there is no better judge than yourself for that sense of self. And the least that we can do for ourselves is hold on to that sense of self through all these attacks on it. I know it's extremely difficult. I know it's extremely difficult to think that there are other possibilities beyond what we are living for the last 6 weeks, and don't know how long we're going to stay like this. But yeah, holding on to that sense of self. And if you have access to the net, then I do think that there are resources available on the net, on social media, where one can talk. I would quickly add that it's not as if all queer spaces in real geographies or in virtual geographies are safe for everyone, but there are a considerable number that are safe. And feeling that security and accessing them, if it is possible, is a good thing. As Raj said, that there are many, and Revati also mentioned that there are many helplines that are being talked about, that are being displayed. One has to realize, though, that most of these people that we are calling community are themselves living precarious lives, and hence support also becomes difficult at times. It becomes extremely it becomes very, very difficult for me to get out of my own sense of vulnerability to reach out to somebody else. And times like these increase everyone's vulnerability. I do think that a lesson to learn for many of us who have many other privileges, and there I come to the question of policy as well as the question of that this is, like every other community, this is an extremely heterogeneous community. We're not talking of one community, we're talking of multiple communities within the spectrum of people. Those of us who have other privileges, who have other social privileges, who are being looked at by society at the moment, who are being looked after by society at the moment, I think a little more burden on us to maybe be there available to reach out to those who are struggling, you know, for the usual question of food, but also for the usual question for many of us of assurance, of a sense of that there are the people, and a sense that at some point in time, we don't know when, there are beacons that will shine at us, where we will move forward, come back. And I totally understand the sense of time, which is not going to be, there's not going to be a recovery from this, which is like, you know, the lockdown is lifted and everything is fine. The recovery is going to be back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And through that, hold on to ourselves, hold on to each other. As far as intimate partner violence goes, I think that it has been extremely difficult to attend to it, even in so-called normal times, because there is no support. There is no support to the relationship to actually gain support for the violence, or to act against the violence. Where do you remove people? I mean, this is domestic violence across board also. You don't know what to do, because you cannot actually remove people geographically from where they are and take them to a safer space. When intimate partner violence is happening in a relationship that is not recognized, in a relationship that is stigmatized, it has its own dimensions. I don't think we found ways, even within the community, to address it adequately. Forget the state. I mean, the state will be very happy, and by state I mean the larger arms of the state, including natal families, etc., would be very happy to break up this relationship and take their person with them and admonish the other person or villainize the other person. So intimate partner violence, we've not talked about enough. We recognize that as a thing that we need to work on more. And I think that we are also kind of listing down ideas that need to be worked on more. And in that, finally, I'll come to the question of migration and the universal income, both. Migration because of economic reasons is one migration. Migration because where I live, I cannot be who I am, whether it is because of my caste, whether it is because of my gender, whether it is because of just my dreams being different from everybody else. And I have a dream to be different from this everyday that is around me. And so I move from where I move. And I move without support. So many of us have moved from, say, cities, from small towns to cities for education. That move has been supported. What we are calling migration here is this, as well as the migration which has happened without support. The migration which has happened without support also means, and we've realized this as we are doing relief work right now, that you have communities living together in a geographical space. You have even Hijra communities living together. But I wonder where the trans men are. I wonder where they are living, because there's no one space where I can reach out to them. There are some contacts that you make, and that's how those 4,500 get some sort of, you know, relief. But others don't get reached to, because you don't know how to reach them. You don't know where they are. They're scattered across. If they have been able to find communities in their neighborhoods, very good for them. But if they're not, then one wonders what is happening to people like that. And so state policy has to be of, you know, giving the basic minimum to everybody. I don't think there's a shortcut to that. I don't think there's a shortcut to saying that the basic minimum that is required for any individual, irrespective of whether they can prove that they're a citizen of this nation, whether they can prove that they have that stupid Aadhaar card or a ration card, whatever, without any paper, every citizen has a right to a basic minimum. And I think this is brought to us, hit us in the face more and more in this pandemic. Not that we've not seen it before, but the way in which we are seeing it, the manner in which it is coming at us this time, I don't think we can shy away from the fact that that is the way to go. Access to education, access to employment, access to good housing, access to water, access to sanitation, and in 2020, access to food. I think if we are if we are to demand this in 2020, when we have abundance of food, when we have enough water, when we have enough housing, it is a shame. It is a shame for society at large to be able to be making these demands in 2020. We're just adding on to that list by saying that employment and education for all. Public education, public health, employment in public sector, all of these seem dreams in today's times, but I don't want to lose that dream. I want to hold on to it. I want to insist that we will keep on asking it, to say that without that, there is no way that each and every individual within this queer communities is going to reach anywhere.
Thanks so much, Janika. We have actually one more question that is open to everyone. This one asks, can you throw some light on the status of the queer disabled community of the country during these times? We also have 2 or 3 people asking about the potential of social media at this time as a platform of solidarity. This has been addressed a few times in the questions in all of the speakers' presentations, but if anybody'd like to specifically talk about it again, they are free to. And if you have any closing comments, we have 3 minutes. So maybe a minute from all of you on any of these. And also we're getting a lot of thanks. Now that we've closed the chat box, we don't have public messages anymore, but lots of people saying thank you to everyone.
Okay, I'll take my minute then. As I said, I think this is a very heterogeneous community. I don't think we've reached to every section of this community has had access to community spaces. And the disabled queer people are part of that. Disabled people who are dependent on native family members to access queer spaces in itself is often something that we cannot even imagine. So how does one then, it's like, we are in a lockdown right now and we don't know how to reach people who are stuck in homes, like the person who asked the first question. When a person is with disabilities that does not allow that person to move out, they're in lockdown all the time. They're in lockdown all the time, they're dependent on somebody to take them. And if that somebody is the barrier through which you cannot move in to reach that person, we don't know what to do. And so I do think that that's another one of those sparked questions. Like, we have to look at how are we living our queer lives in intimacies. We have to look at the question of how do we reach out to people who cannot come and reach us. Yeah.
I think, thanks, Janika. I echo what Chair has said about accessibility and disability. There's also the very real question of whether it's psychosocial, physical, or sensory disability, the inability to get medication, to get physiotherapy or support. Again, when it comes to lack of care from both natal family and state, these are particular problems for queer and trans persons. And as a part of the mental health establishment, I'm going to say that we are going to look online. There is a lot of all of a sudden focus from the mental health community in India on providing care at this time. But I think I'm a little bit angry because they waited until COVID, whereas I think that a lot of us in this country have been plunged into deep distress since October 2019 over CA NRC. So where were you then? And why have you only volunteered now? And at this point, I want to be extremely political and say that as queer friendly as queer affirmative as mental health practitioners may be, queer community has been doing this work a very long time. before 377, before NALSA. They will keep on doing it. And again, all these services have sprung up only in the last 2-3 years. So it's very important. And I'm going to say that at this point in time, queer communities are best to reach out to over virtual spaces if you do have the privileges of using virtual space.
Thanks, Raj. Mangai, could you translate for Revati, please?
Revati, last comments ஒரு நிமிஷத்துல ஏதாவது சொல்லலாம். queer disability பற்றி நம்ம என்ன பண்ணிருக்கோம். இப்ப வந்து நீங்க யாருக்கா ஸ்பெசிஃபிக்கா ரீச் அவுட் பண்ணணும்னு நினைக்கிறவங்களுக்கு ஏதாவது சஜஷன்ஸ் கொடுக்க போறீங்களா? ரேவதி
சொல்லுங்கம்மா.
அந்த கேள்விக்கு ஏதாவது சொல்றதுன்னா ஒரு நிமிஷத்துல சொல்லலாம்.
கேக்குதம்மா?
கேக்குது, இப்ப கேக்குது.
குயர் டிசபிலிட்டி பத்தி நான் வந்து கர்நாடகால வேலை பார்த்தும் போது நிறைய வேலை பார்த்திருக்கோம். இப்ப கூட வந்து கிரண் அப்படின்னு சொல்லிட்டு ஒரு எஃப்டிஎம் வந்து ரொம்ப நல்லா வேலை பார்த்துக்கிட்டு இருக்கான் பெங்களூர்ல. அவங்கள பத்தி இன்னும் அதிகமா எல்லாரும் இன்னும் வந்து வேலை செய்யல. ஆனா எல்லாருமே அதை பத்தியும் வந்து வேலை செய்யணும் அப்படின்றது என்னுடைய விருப்பம். நான் என்ன சொல்லிக்க நான் விரும்புறேன்னா, எல்லாரும் நீங்க வந்து பாதுகாப்பா இருங்க, முகக்கவசம் நீங்க வந்து போட்டுக்குங்க, தனிமையில இருங்க, விலகி இருங்க. ஆனா கண்டிப்பா நம்மளுடைய வாழ்வாதாரத்துக்கு என்ன வழி அப்படின்றது அரசாங்கத்துக்கிட்ட நீங்க வந்து கோரிக்கையும் இடுங்க அப்படின்றத நான் கடைசியா முடிச்சுக்கிறேன்.
Yeah, she said at least in Karnataka they had begun working with queer disabled people. Kiran is there in Bangalore and has been consistently working on it, but there's very less material available on the work that they have been doing. So we have begun that work. It's not yet over. It hasn't really reached as much. As far as what she wants to say as a kind of a closing remark, she says, one is for us all to stay safe and stay indoors, stay with social distancing, whatever, but also start making the demands that we need for our own survival. And that has to be done at this time. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult when they say the doors are open, when the lockdown is out. That's going to be difficult. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Revati. Thank you, Mangai. And actually, thank you to everyone. We're going to close now, but I just want to announce again that we're really, really grateful to Chainika, Raj, Revati, and Mangai for this, for speaking to us at this time, and your guidance and comments have been incredibly useful. I don't have any platitudes, but there's anger, and that'll continue. Thank you to everybody for attending, and thank you for so many of you for sticking around and listening to the answers to your questions and others' questions. Please join us again for the last in this series, which should be on Saturday. We will send out a final email that has information about that by tomorrow or day after. But all of these talks, including the one that we had today, will be uploaded on our nascent YouTube channel and also posted to social media. And you can be able to access all of those there. So thank you, everybody. We are closing now and hopefully see you all on Saturday. Everybody, please stay safe.